It has always been there. Small, thin, with messy hair and a lost look between the dirt floor and the screams that came from the house. Everyone saw it, but no one really looked. It was as if she were just another shadow among the many sad stories that are repeated behind the scenes of big cities. A poor girl, forgotten like so many others. But there was something different about her. A silence that screamed. A type of pain that cannot be learned. An absence that spoke louder than any words. No one knew for sure where she had come from. It was said that her parents had died when she was still a baby. An accident, perhaps, or abandonment. No one cared enough to confirm. Since she was little, she was thrown from house to house, always as a burden, an unwanted responsibility. He grew up hearing that he was worthless, that he was a nuisance, a mistake. He had no name or surname, just an ugly nickname they gave her in the village, almost as if it were a reminder that she was not welcome. It was common to see her walking barefoot down the mud street, with clothes that were too loose and an always quiet countenance. He never asked for anything, neither food nor affection. And perhaps that was what scared those who saw her the most. The fact that she learned so early not to expect anything from anyone. It was as if she knew, somehow, that the world owed her nothing, and that if she wanted to survive, she would have to learn to shut up. But behind that faded face, there was something that few could perceive, a kind of silent resistance, a strength that did not come from anger, but from waiting, as if inside her there was a certainty that it was all just a part of the journey, as if somewhere she knew that there was a hidden truth about to come to light. And that was precisely what made her presence so impactful. Even without saying anything, she said everything. She carried with her a kind of mystery that aroused something in people, a discomfort, a nuisance, as if the mere fact of existing was already a living reminder that the world can be cruel to those who need care the most. The people of the village didn't know much about her, and that was convenient. It helped to justify the contempt. After all, it is easier to ignore someone when you do not know their story. And she never told anything, because he never had the chance. Living at the mercy of adults who saw her only as cheap labor, she learned to fend for herself. Washing, cooking, taking care of the little ones, all without complaint. Any sign of resistance was followed by punishment, and they were not simple punishments. No, there were slaps, pushes, nights without eating, words sharp as a razor. And yet she endured it, with his eyes downcast, with his soul in pieces, but in silence. There were days when she would sit in a corner of the yard and stare at the sky for hours, maybe looking for some kind of answer, or trying to remember something he never got to know. Sometimes he dreamed of a soft voice, a warm lap, a presence that he never had, but that somehow seemed familiar, as if there was something inside her trying to awaken, to scream, to be heard, something that said, "You don't belong here." But it was hard to believe. It was hard to keep hope when everything around insisted on remembering that she was nobody, when every decision made by those around her was based on humiliation, when every gesture was accompanied by contempt. She had no friends. She didn't go to school. She didn't receive gifts. What I really had was resistance, a rare type of courage that is only born in those who have seen too much, in those who learn to protect themselves with their own silence. And it was in this silence that she survived, without raising your voice, without fighting back, without surrendering to revolt, just enduring, hoping, as if to know that sometimes life saves its greatest revelations for the most unlikely moments. And though no one could have imagined it, the truth about that girl was much greater than the torn clothes or the dirty feet seemed to indicate, because inside her there was a secret, a hidden truth that was about to turn everything upside down. And as she sat in that same corner, with her hands resting on her knees and her eyes looking at the horizon, something was about to happen. A small detail, a chance meeting, a seemingly simple decision, and everything would change forever. If you like real, exciting, and transformative stories, subscribe to the channel to follow this complete journey. She didn't know exactly when the pain started, but she knew she had been with her since her eyes began to see the world. It all started very early. When she was too young to understand, her parents died in an accident that no one explained properly. It was not an illness that took her, nor a predicted tragedy. It just happened, and she was left alone. At first, maybe she had some hope, some idea that someone would come to take care of her. But soon reality taught her otherwise. Instead of being welcomed, she was left in the hands of those who saw nothing more in her than a burden. The first memories she had of her new life were always fearful. Fear of being seen, fear of being rejected, fear of being ignored. All she had, besides pain, was loneliness. There was no one else to protect her, no one to love her, no one to look at her and say, "It's okay, I'm here." She was no longer a daughter. It was just a weight that needed to be carried, a mistake that others couldn't shake off. And the people who received her, with the promise of taking care of her, were nothing more than shadows, cold figures who saw in her nothing but another mouth to feed and another child to mistreat. The girl grew up not knowing what affection was, without understanding the meaning of a hug. She didn't remember being hugged, feeling the warmth of a lap. Instead, the years went by, and she learned the hard way what pain, rejection, and contempt were. The days were long, colorless, meaningless. Food was not given generously, but with obligation. Clothes were passed from one to another, dirty and torn, as if the dignity of a child were something disposable. Education? She didn't. What she knew, she learned by herself, with calloused hands and tired eyes from looking for meaning in it all. And the most painful thing of all was not the fact that she had nothing to eat or that she was treated like a servant. Worst of all, when she looked at the other children, she realized that they had something she had never experienced. The gaze of someone who cares. They had parents. They had someone to take care of them. To protect them, she doesn't. She was invisible. And, little by little, what the words did not say, the gestures made clear. She had no value. To those around her, she was just a nameless, unimportant girl, a child with an uncertain future and no hope. It hurt her deeply, more than any physical punishment or mistreatment. The worst mistreatment for her was the pain of being ignored, of being treated as something disposable, a shadow that existed without anyone really seeing her. She listened to adults talk about their own lives, their own problems, without realizing that here was someone who also had a story, a pain, but they didn't care. To them, she was nothing, and she believed it little by little. With every word she heard, every slap she took, every day of suffering, she began to believe that maybe it was just a burden, a mistake that should be erased. With every criticism, every expression of disdain, every contempt, she sank deeper into an abyss of loneliness and pain. But there was something inside her, a small flame that refused to die. It was hard to understand, because everything around her seemed to scream otherwise, but she never completely gave up believing that somewhere, something could change. It was not hope. It was a silent struggle, an invisible resistance. She didn't know where she came from, but she knew that she wasn't just the orphan girl, the rejected girl. She had something inside her that others couldn't see, something that, no matter how hard they tried to suffocate, still burned there, stored somewhere deep inside her. It was hard to believe that anything could change. How could he? She was alone, with no family, no one who wanted her. The others saw her only as a worthless child, with no prospects, and she began to think that maybe that was what it was, that there was nothing left behind her tired eyes. But somehow, she refused to believe that her fate was that. Even when all seemed lost, something inside her insisted that she had a purpose. Something inside her knew that even though the world treated her like nothing, she still had something to offer. As she spent her days quietly, serving others, doing laundry, and doing heavy chores for those who didn't have the patience to give her even a smile, her mind began to work in a different way. She was beginning to realize that maybe life had more to offer, that maybe what others said about her wasn't true. She didn't know how yet, but something inside her said that her story wouldn't end there, that she was more than what the world had told her. She believed, even if she did not know where this belief came from, that her story was far from finished, that at some point she would be seen. And that's when, perhaps unknowingly, she began to change. Gradually, she stopped seeing herself as a victim. She began to perceive herself as a survivor. What seemed to be rock bottom, what she imagined to be her eternal destiny, began to become just a step, something she would overcome, something she would face. And as time passed, she began to realize that perhaps the key to changing her life was not to wait to be rescued, but to do something for herself. But, of course, she still didn't know that something was about to happen, something that would come to turn everything upside down, as the world remained uncaring. She prepared for the biggest upheaval of her life, one that would change everything she believed about herself, others, and destiny. A revelation that would make her see life in a completely new way, an opportunity that she never imagined possible, but that, deep down, she knew was always waiting for her. And it was at that moment that her story began to change. Something was about to be revealed, something she could never have imagined, something that would open doors to a new path, a path she never believed she could follow. Her journey was just beginning. She didn't know what it was like to feel loved. When the other children ran around their parents, hugging them and asking for affection, she felt invisible. The only contact she knew was the cold of the hands that touched her impatiently and the screams that echoed inside the house. The punishments were not only physical, they were psychological, a silent torture that burned much more than any blow. She knew that she had no value, that she was nothing more than a burden. And this did not come only from harsh words, but from the absence of any gesture of affection or compassion. In the eyes of those around her, she was a servant, a child destined to follow orders, to do the heavy lifting. From morning until night, there was no rest. He took the clothes to the river and washed them with calloused hands, while the other children played without worries. When he was hungry, the most he received was a piece of crusty bread, which was barely enough to soothe the pain in his stomach. But what tore her apart most was not hunger. It was a feeling of not being seen, of not having the right to a place in this world, of being treated as if she did not deserve even the remnants of what others had. If she tried to smile, she was repressed. If she spoke, she was soon silenced. Any attempt to stand out, to be more than just a ghost, was destroyed by the cutting words of those who were supposed to be her caretakers. They told her that she was not worthy of being loved, that she could never do anything right. She was always wrong. It always fails, always incomplete. And every day she believed more in it. With every look of contempt, with every sarcastic laugh, she felt more down, smaller, more unimportant. It was hard to believe, but she began to think that maybe it was true, that the world, in fact, had no place for her. That life had forgotten her and left her behind. When the work became too much, when the task seemed too heavy for his little shoulders, the punishment came. And it wasn't just physical. It wasn't just the hard hands that struck her or the hunger that caused her belly to be swallowed with pain. It was the shouting, the cursing, the public humiliation. It was the fact that she was treated as if she was there to be only a burden, a source of frustration for others, a reflection of their frustrations. Every word she heard left her more marked, more stuck at the bottom of the well, a well where no one seemed to care to throw a rope to help her. There were days when she would sit in the darkest corner of the house and cry in silence. I didn't want anyone to see it. She didn't want her to be laughed at or mocked at her pain again. She dreamed of a day when someone would look her in the eye and say, "I love you. I've got you covered. You are important." But that day never came. Not for her. She didn't know what it was like to be hugged, to be caressed. The nights were long, with no one to protect her from her fears. The silence of the night was not comforting. It was overwhelming, a constant reminder that she was alone. As time passed, the girl learned to shut up, to hide. She learned not to ask for anything else, not to dream bigger. All she wanted was to be invisible, so that no one else would hurt her. But even so, the pain did not subside. It wasn't just physical. It was the pain of being devalued, the pain of being constantly humiliated by something she couldn't control. She was no ordinary child. She had no right to be a child. His childhood was stolen, not by accident, but by a cruel choice of those around him. The most terrible thing was a complete indifference. Those who were supposed to be her protectors, her adoptive parents, seemed to look down on her. She didn't know why she was left there, why no one came to take her out of that place of pain. She heard people talking about love, about affection, but it seemed that these words never applied to her. The girl dreamed of being loved. She dreamed of being seen. But what she received were hard looks and sharp words, like blades that cut through her soul more than any visible wound. At school, it was no different. The other children seemed to have everything she didn't have: caring parents, toys, friends. She felt like a spectator, looking at the lives of the other children as if they were a distant movie. She wanted to be a part of it, but she didn't know how. How could she fit into a world that seemed to have been made for everyone but her? She tried, but always failed. When he approached someone, he always felt the weight of fear, of insecurity, the fear of being rejected once again. And most of the time, that's what happened. She was rejected, again and again. Each rejection made her more fragile, more believing that it might be really impossible to find some kind of happiness. Perhaps she was even destined to live that way, to never know what it is to be truly loved or embraced. What she didn't know, however, is that all that pain was building strength inside her, a force that she still did not understand, but that one day, at some point in her life, would become the fuel for the transformation that she did not even imagine possible. But that was still a long way off, very far away. She was still sunk into the deep end, in a world that didn't see her, that didn't care. But, like everything in life, even rock bottom has a way out, and she was about to find out. She didn't know it, but something was about to happen, something that would completely change his trajectory, something that would make her understand that, as much as everything had been against her until then, her story had not yet come to an end. Despite everything she went through, something inside her refused to die. It was a small flame, almost imperceptible, but still present. Even when the world seemed to crumble around her, when the screams and punishments were constant, something about her held firm. She didn't know exactly what it was, but she felt that despite the overwhelming pain, there was still a chance for something different, a chance to be more than what life told her she was. In her loneliest moments, she wondered why all this was happening to her. Why did she, of all the children in the world, seem to be doomed to live in that nightmare? But deep down, I knew I didn't have an answer. What she had was something much stronger, the will to believe that one day her life would be different. She didn't know when or how, but she felt, with all the intensity of her being, that there was something else waiting for her, something beyond pain, beyond rejection, something she deserved. And maybe that's what kept her going. It was as if a deep instinct, something she could barely explain, kept her upright. She saw other children, wondered what it was like to be loved, what it was like to be happy, but she never questioned herself if she deserved it. She never doubted her ability to find something better. She just knew that things needed to change, that life couldn't just be suffering. Deep down, she believed that her story would not be written by others, but by herself. She knew that somehow, one day, she would have control of her life. Even with no one to help her, even when the words of hatred and contempt were hurled at her, she did not let herself succumb. She didn't have much, but what she did have was her inner strength, something that no one could take away from her, something that came from within, from the heart. It was a silent force, which manifested itself in the moments when she sat alone, reflecting on her dreams. They were simple dreams, but full of a hope that could not be erased. She imagined a life in which she would be loved, where she could smile without fear of being scolded, where he did not have to carry the weight of being invisible. In her deepest thoughts, she saw herself in a different place, perhaps in a garden, where the sunlight shone softly and the wind caressed his face. She heard laughter all around her, but more importantly, she found herself smiling. She smiled because she knew she was worthy of that smile, and she felt, with immense certainty, that that place, that smile, that love were waiting for her. The girl knew she no longer had to carry the weight of the past. She knew she could, one day, leave it all behind and create something new, a story that was hers, entirely hers. Gradually, she learned to channel this force. It was not a physical force like that of others who had an easier life, but it was something that came from the mind and the spirit. She began to believe that instead of being defeated, she could use her experiences to lift herself up. She felt that she was not what others said she was. She was not weak. It was not useless. It was strong. She knew it, even if no one else saw it, even if no one else believed her. She began to understand that what was going through did not define her, but what she would choose to do from that would have the power to determine her destiny. Even on the darkest nights, when fears and loneliness took over, there was something in her heart that kept her alive, something that told her that although the road was arduous, there was something greater waiting for her. She clung to it like a lifeline, and she didn't let anything, not even the biggest challenges, make her let go of this belief. The girl knew that one day, when she was older, she could look back and see that the pain that now consumed her was not in vain. She knew her story would be different. Even though she didn't know when it would happen, she firmly believed that in time, she would discover the truth about herself, the hidden truth of its strength. She didn't have the answers yet, but she felt like the journey was just beginning. She didn't see herself as a victim. No more. Even on the worst days, she told herself that sooner or later she would find a way out. It was a quiet but powerful belief. With each passing day, she felt more determined to fight against the circumstances that surrounded her. And somehow, the pain began to become fuel for something bigger, to a future where she would be the protagonist of her own life. His eyes, once filled with fear and sadness, began to glow with a renewed flame. She didn't know how, but she felt that the impossible was within her reach. And even in the midst of the darkness of her childhood, she had already taken the first step towards something that would change her forever. She still didn't know how strong she was, but she was about to find out. And when that happened, nothing, absolutely nothing, could stop her anymore. Her journey was just beginning, but within her there was a growing certainty. What she believed to be a burden now would later turn into a story of overcoming and transformation, because life, even in its cruelest forms, has the power to shape us into something great. She just needed to trust it. She needed to believe that the future she imagined was not an illusion. And as he allowed himself to dream, as he allowed himself to grow, this truth became stronger every day. She was no longer alone. She had herself. She had the strength to never give up. And as much as the world didn't seem to notice, she was about to write her own story. And her story, as she would soon realize, would be one of the most powerful of all. It was an ordinary day, or at least it seemed to be. The girl was there, as always, trying to help where she could, doing small favors on the streets, where the disdainful looks of others didn't touch her so much. She had grown accustomed to the idea of being invisible, of being treated as if she were nothing. The day was sultry, and she did what she could to earn some money, as she had done so many times, expecting nothing more than the crumbs that were offered her. The sun's heat seemed to reflect the temperature of his life, something constant, relentless, without significant changes. Routine involved her, and deep down, she was no longer surprised by the harshness of the world. But that day, something happened. He appeared suddenly, as if he had emerged from a place where time did not pass, without warning. A man with a deep look, a look that seemed to penetrate not only the flesh, but the soul. He was not like the others. He didn't treat her like a simple street child. He didn't make a point of looking at her as if she were just another miserable in the crowd. There was something about his way that made her hesitate for a moment, a silent respect, a look that seemed to see something in her that even she couldn't understand. It was a fleeting moment, but when he looked at her, she felt in her heart that something had changed. And that's all it took for her to feel a growing restlessness within herself. He seemed to have noticed something special, something she had never known she had. He wasn't the kind of man who would sit in his comfortable chair and look down on her like everyone else. He saw her in a different way, with genuine curiosity, the kind of curiosity that came with a rare softness, something she had only seen in books or movies, when the main character had a glint of hope in her eyes, something that made her be seen by someone who understood her. This man was interested in her, not out of pity, but out of something deeper, something she couldn't explain. For a moment, she tried to ignore what she felt. She tried to convince herself that he was just another person, another stranger who, like everyone else, would soon disappear from her life. But there was something about him, something in his gaze, that wouldn't dissipate. He didn't seem to want to just give some money and move on. No, he was there for another reason. It was almost as if he was trying to understand who she really was. Something bothered her, but at the same time, something inside her stirred, as if a door was being opened slightly. She knew this was a rare opportunity, but doubt began to take over his chest. What did he want from her? Why her? So many other children were there, fighting for the same thing, and yet she was the one he chose. He approached, and the silence between them seemed dense, loaded with a meaning she couldn't grasp. The man was not imposing, but he had something enigmatic. He didn't speak immediately, just watched her for a moment longer than would be comfortable for anyone else. The girl felt her heart racing, and although she'd been raised not to expect anything from anyone, she couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity, something that made her want to know more about this man. He looked familiar, not physically, but in a strange sensation that crept through his guts. It was as if she already knew him from somewhere, or as if he knew something about her that no one else did. He had seen in her eyes, perhaps, the same sparkle as someone who had gone through the pain and who, despite this, still found a reason to believe that something better could come along. Perhaps he was seeing what she was still trying to hide, even from herself. And from the moment their eyes met, something began to happen. "You've got something in you," the man said, his voice soft but with a hint of firmness. "Something I've seen in others, in places very far from here. Did you know that?" The girl was silent. What did he mean by that? How could he see something in her that she herself did not see? She wanted to answer, but the words just wouldn't come. He stared at her for a while, as if trying to decipher a riddle. Something in his expression revealed a deeper understanding, as if he knew what she had experienced, what she was going through, and it made her feel different. The girl felt a wave of insecurity, mixed with a curiosity as strong as a whirlwind. The man then did something that left her speechless. He lowered himself, as if he wanted to enter his level, not as a superior, but as someone he genuinely wanted to understand. His gaze was full of silent empathy, but at the same time there was a lightness there, as if he was giving her the freedom to be who she was, without pressure, without fear. He wasn't there to judge her. He was there for something more, something that she at that moment could not explain, but felt. "I see great potential in you," he said, and somehow those words touched something deep in his heart. "You have something inside you that can change your destiny, change your life. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The girl looked at him, not knowing what to answer. She didn't know if she should believe what he was saying, but something in his tone made her wonder, what if he was right? She knew that everything in her life had been so hard, so heavy, and that she had always had to fight alone. And now this man appeared, like a specter in her life, offering something she had never imagined, a word of encouragement, a different vision of what she thought her destiny was. What did he see in her? How did he know about the pain she carried? How had he known that she felt she would never be more than that, more than the orphan and abused child who only existed to survive? And why did he seem to believe that she had the potential to change his own life? The girl's mind was racing, with more questions than answers. But one thing she knew, that meeting was no accident. She felt that something was about to happen, that simple exchange of words had the power to alter something inside her. And as much as she didn't know what was going to come next, something inside her was changing. Something inside her was beginning to believe. What she didn't know at that moment, while still trying to understand the man's words, was that this encounter, so casual and at the same time so unusual, was about to turn into the twist that would change her life forever. Something so profound and unexpected was about to be revealed, something that couldn't be further from the reality she knew. Everything she thought was her world, with its pains, limitations, and challenges, would begin to crumble in the face of the truth he held. The impact of this would be a shock, an awakening. He was not just an ordinary man. What she didn't know was that he had been looking for her for years in silence, and not just any way. The man was on a personal journey, a journey of discovery, full of secrets and issues that even she did not imagine were connected to her. He didn't find her by chance. In fact, he had been preparing for this moment for a long time, with a quiet determination and a hope that, like her, seemed never to have completely died. After that first meeting, he didn't disappear like so many others who had crossed her path. No, he did. But this time, there was something different in the air. He came with the certainty of someone who knew he was close to something much bigger. something that transcended any concept of simple charity or momentary kindness. He came with a truth, a revelation so profound that it would change everything, not only for her, but also for him. Unhurriedly, the man approached once again. He no longer needed empty words. He knew that the right time had come to reveal what was in store. "A long time ago I searched for you, and now I know I found you," he said calmly. She looked at him, still not fully understanding. "What do you mean by that?" he continued, his voice now charged with something deeper, something that sounded almost like a promise. "I am your father." The girl blinked, unable to process. The words didn't make sense. She knew what it was like to lose someone, but that man over there, saying he was her father, how could this be true? She looked at him with a mixture of confusion and incredulity, but he looked at her with a silent intensity, an intensity that spoke of years of searching, of years of pain. He was not just there as a stranger, nor as a benefactor. He was there as someone who had long missed her, and who had finally found a missing piece of his heart. He then explained how life had taken him away from her, and how, for many years, he had tried to track down his daughter, not only with the hope of finding someone, but with the certainty that his daughter was out there, lost, but alive. He never stopped looking. His journey had not only been a physical quest, but an internal journey as well. He knew it existed, but the system that separated them seemed impenetrable. Time and distance were silent enemies. But he never lost faith that one day something would make her appear again. As he spoke, she began to understand the pieces of the puzzle. The man was not just talking about a physical loss, a simple estrangement between father and daughter. He was talking about a story of resilience, strength, and unrequited love. He had faced adversity that she herself did not know was possible, and now the truth he brought with him seemed as surreal as any dream she had ever had, but she had never allowed herself to believe. She had always known that something inside her was different, something that didn't fit, something that maybe she herself was trying to forget. But there was, in front of her, the answer. "I searched for so long, and now, finally, I can look at you and say, I am your father, and nothing and no one will take you away from me again." The words were charged with emotion, with something profound that she never imagined hearing, something that made her feel that the impossible was perhaps real. She didn't know what to make of this revelation. The shock was immense. She felt a mixture of disbelief, anger, happiness, and fear. How could this be possible? How could he be her father, if everything in his life has always been marked by loneliness, pain, and abandonment? But there was something in his voice, something that left no room for doubt. She could feel the weight of his words, the suffering he had gone through to get there, to finally speak to her, to finally tell his truth. And as he spoke, she felt something deep inside her, something she had never known existed. It was as if a door was finally opened inside her, a door she hadn't known had been locked for so long. She thought about all the difficult times she had faced, all the times she felt alone, as if the whole world had turned its back on her. She thought about the times when she looked in the mirror and couldn't recognize herself, wondering where she came from, who she really was, where so much suffering, so much loneliness came from. And now, before her, was the key to what seemed to be a new beginning. His father, someone who had been looking for her for years, someone who believed in her when everyone else seemed to have forgotten her. The revelation it brought was not just about a man and a girl meeting after so many years. It was a revelation that she was no longer alone, that the pain she carried did not need to be carried any longer. It was proof that even when all seemed lost, love and the search for truth could transform lives in ways she never imagined. And it made her realize that maybe her journey, up until that point, was just a preparation for something bigger, for a future where she could finally be seen, loved, and understood by someone who really knew her. Her life, until then marked by struggle and survival, was about to turn a page. But the most surprising thing of all was that, within her own journey, she already carried the power to transform not only her life, but that of everyone around her. What would she do with this truth? How would he react to the weight of a destiny as great as the one unfolding in front of him? She felt that, somehow, the impact of this revelation would not stop there. Something even greater was to come, something that would make all of her past somehow understandable. And then, As he looked at her, hoping that she would accept his truth, she felt that the decision was in her hands. The future lay before her, waiting to be shaped. And now, she was no longer alone to do it. The moment seemed to have frozen in time, as if the whole world had paused so that she could understand what was happening. But reality was far more powerful than any idea of a stop. It was an intense, raw, unbeatable truth that was beginning to unfold before his eyes. The man who claimed to be her father was not just there to talk. He had a purpose, a mission, and that mission was about to bring irreversible change to her life. He was no ordinary man, and he was not willing to wait another second. Without hesitation, he stood up, his eyes with a quiet determination, but laden with a weight she couldn't ignore. "Come on," he said in a firm voice, still calm, but with the strength of one who was determined not to let anything or anyone interfere with what he knew to be right. He looked at her, as if he was transmitting not just words, but an energy that made her feel security she had never known. As they walked away from the place where they had met, the sense of urgency took over her. Something bigger was happening, and she could barely process the impact of every word he had said. She tried to understand why all that was happening so fast, but at the same time, she knew there was no turning back. Something was being done there, something that touched the depths of his soul. The man then took her directly to the place where she was kept, the place where all the suffering, pain, and injustice accumulated. Each step seemed to be a reminder of what she had been through. The smell of humiliation was in the air, and each wall seemed to echo the memories of their lonely nights, of their days of struggling to simply survive. But all that was about to be broken. When they arrived, his gaze did not waver. He knew what he needed to do. He knew the weight of the responsibility he carried. The door opened, and he entered without hesitation, with an authority that came from his essence. He was no longer the distant man, who only thought about the daughter he had once lost. No, at that moment he was a father who had the truth on his side, and who knew that by rescuing his daughter, he was not only doing justice, but something deeper. He was giving her back the dignity, love, and respect she had long deserved. The tension in the air was palpable, but what happened next was a moment that neither of them could have predicted. He stared at those who had mistreated her, and something in his eyes caused him to recant. The atmosphere seemed to have changed completely. He didn't have to say a word. Just his presence, the energy he transmitted, made everything around him bow before his strength. He was there to do what had to be done. Nothing and no one could stop him anymore. That's when he approached her and, for the first time, their eyes met in a deep way. He extended his arms and, with a simple gesture but full of emotion, hugged her. It was a long hug, loaded with all the promises he had already made and so many others unsaid. And in that embrace, she felt something she had never imagined, a sense of peace that seemed impossible. It was not only the warmth of a body that enveloped her, but the certainty that, finally, she was being rescued from everything that had made her suffer. "Never again will you suffer," he said firmly, and his words reverberated like an echo deep within his being. She didn't know if she could believe everything that was happening. What seemed like a dream now unfolded before her eyes, in a reality full of emotion and something profound that she couldn't define. The pain of the past seemed to finally begin to dissipate, but her journey, this true transformation, was still ongoing. She felt, for the first time, that she could fully trust, that could be seen and, more importantly, could be truly loved. This rescue was not only physical, but something that penetrated the deepest layers of his being. He was not only taking her out of a place of suffering, but out of a state of uncertainty, of fear, of a wounded heart that was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be protected, to be loved unconditionally. The man, by doing what seemed to be the impossible, was not only freeing her from prison, but also rescuing her from a life that, until that moment, seemed to have no prospect of change. His hug, so full of meaning, made it clear that she was going to a new place, a place where she could finally experience true transformation, where her journey would no longer be one of pain, but a renewal. As he held her, she felt something in his words that reverberated in a profound way. Now, everything's going to be different. There is no more pain. There is no more fear. Your future starts today. And there, in that moment, she knew that this was not just an empty promise. It was a real change, something that would change everything she knew about herself and the world around her. The impact of those words, the way he was willing to fight for it, meant that the reality of his journey was finally understood in its entirety. The pain she had felt, the scars she carried, were beginning to be replaced by a force that came from within. She didn't know where this new path would take her, but she knew that alongside it, the shadows of the past would no longer dominate her life. And as they walked into the future, she realized that the journey was just beginning. What was happening now, with his rescue, was just the beginning of a new chapter, of a new life. She knew that, next to him, the impossible could be possible, and with a heavy but at the same time light heart, she followed by his side for whatever came next, feeling that the greatest impact was yet to come. The change was as rapid as it was overwhelming. The girl who once lived in the shadows of a cruel and hopeless world now found herself surrounded by a new universe, full of light and promise. The dirty basement where she spent her days, with its damp walls and constant sense of confinement, now seemed like a distant memory, as if it were another life, a life that was no longer part of her. Every detail around her now told her that something great was in motion, something she had never imagined, but that she felt in every fiber of her being. She woke up every day in a room that looked more like a fairy tale. The walls, once broken and lifeless, were now painted in soft and welcoming colors. The bed, soft and inviting, seemed to envelop her in a sense of comfort she had never known existed. The bedroom, which had previously been a simple space to hide, was now her refuge, a place where she could finally find herself. More than the luxuries or the decoration, what really mattered was the sensations that this new environment aroused in her. She felt safe, free to be who she really was, without the chains of pain and suffering that had previously accompanied her. Now, she had more than just a roof over her head. She had access to knowledge, to education, something that seemed so distant before. It wasn't just books. They were open doors to a future she had never believed possible. School, with her teachers and classmates, became a new world, where she could explore her ideas, expand her mind, and learn to express herself in a way that had not been given to her before. But the real revolution was in her mind. She saw herself as someone capable, someone who could not only learn but also teach, transform, and, above all, dream. And those dreams that once seemed far away were now more than just imagination. They were real, palpable, and she was determined to reach them. The relationship with the man who was now her father deepened every day. What began as a simple rescue now became something much stronger, a soul connection, an unconditional love that transcended any limits. Not only did he keep the promise he had made never to let her suffer again, but he showed her, in every gesture, in every word, the true meaning of protection, affection, and care. The way he looked at her, how he listened to her, how he took care of her simplest needs, let her know that now there was no loneliness. He was a safe haven she had never known she could have, and in his eyes she could see not only the reflection of a beloved daughter, but also the brilliance of a strong woman, capable of conquering the world. The impact of this change was not only emotional, but also physical. The suffering and the marks of past hardships began to fade. She ate well, with a balanced diet full of nutrients that revitalized her body and mind. She was accompanied by specialists who took care of her health, rebuilding not only the damage that life had caused her, but also her self-esteem. The mirror that once reflected sadness and pain now reflected a confident young woman, with a twinkle in her eyes and a smile on her lips. She had transformed not only on the outside, but on the inside. Each day was a victory, an overcoming. But most impressive of all was her look into the future. Before, their dreams seemed impossible, like something for other people who didn't carry the same burdens, the same scars. She thought of a career, of a life of achievements, but always with the weight of doubt. Now, these dreams became not only possible, but imminent. She was on the path to transforming her life in ways she had never imagined. The old pain of not knowing what to expect from each day, of fearing the next step, had now been replaced by an unshakable confidence in herself. And when she looked to the future, she no longer saw a world of closed doors. She saw a palace. The palace was not made of gold or precious stones, but of opportunities, of trust, of a genuine love that surrounded her. Every detail of his new world, of his new life, was a reminder of his strength, of his ability to overcome adversity and create something extraordinary from a story of suffering. This transformation didn't happen overnight, but with each choice, with each decision, she was distancing herself more and more from her old life. She now had the opportunity to learn, grow, and most importantly, fall in love with the process of becoming who she had always dreamed of being. The barrier she believed existed between her and her goals began to crumble. What once seemed distant and unreachable was now within reach. Her new father, with his experience, vision, and unconditional support, was by her side, guiding her, but never taking away her autonomy. He knew that she had to walk her own path, that her journey was hers, but he also knew that with him by her side, nothing could really stop her. And it was in this environment of transformation that she began to take the first steps towards making her dreams come true. With each achievement, no matter how small, she felt that she was a little closer to her goal. She, who previously saw herself as a shadow of what she could be, now saw herself as a protagonist of her own story. And as she reflected on all that had happened, the rescue, the change of life, the love she was now receiving, and the person she was becoming, she knew that none of this had been by chance. It was a result of a journey of overcoming, of bold decisions, of difficult choices, but also profound revelations that led her there. And so, the young girl who had once known the deepest suffering now lived a reality full of possibilities. Each day was a new chapter in her life, and she was determined to make each of those chapters filled with achievement and happiness. After all, she knew that her story was no longer defined by the past, but rather by the incredible journey of transformation she was creating. And this new beginning, this palace of dreams fulfilled, was just the beginning of an extraordinary life she had conquered. Her transformation was something no one could have predicted. If before she was a girl marked by pain, rejection, and loneliness, now she became the very embodiment of strength. But this strength didn't come from a place of anger or revenge. It was born from the unique ability to transform pain into something much greater. From a humiliated girl, she transformed into a woman who exuded confidence, wisdom, and immeasurable kindness. She no longer carried the anguish of the past, but an inner flame that guided her to make a difference in the world. She knew that her story, which had once been something she wished to forget, was now a beacon of inspiration to so many others. That young girl who was rescued from the darkness, who had known abandonment in its cruelest form, now used every bit of her experience to help other children who were living the same nightmare. She became a reference for them, a source of hope that showed, with her own life, that pain didn't have to define who you would be forever. She had learned to be the very change she so longed to see in the world. And with every step she took, she carried with her the promise of a different future for those who were where she had been. Now, her mission was clear, to help other children get out of the same darkness she once knew. She became an advocate for the rights of the underprivileged, a true voice for the voiceless. The work she did was immense, but the impact she made was profound and real. She founded organizations, participated in foster care programs, dedicated herself body and soul to ensuring that other children did not experience the horrors that she herself suffered. His ability to love and give of himself to others was unwavering. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, what it meant to be invisible, what it meant not to have a home, a family, and that was what motivated her to fight for a better future. Pain, which had once been his prison, now turned into his strength. Every scar on his soul became a testament to his endurance. The rejection, which once nearly broke her, was now her purpose, a force that propelled her forward. She no longer saw abandonment as a destination, but as a life experience that prepared her to be a source of transformation. She knew that rejection was not the end of her story, but the beginning of something much bigger. Those wounds, which once seemed immortal, were now just marks of overcoming. With each child she helped, with each life she touched, with each step she took to transform the reality of others, she felt that she was becoming more whole, more complete. She was no longer the lost girl in the world. She was a woman with a mission, with a clear purpose, to change the world one life at a time. Her transformation was not only visible in what she did, but in the profound impact she generated. Her journey of overcoming inspired those who accompanied her. She became an example of moral authority, of someone who did not let herself be defeated by circumstances, but who used each challenge as a springboard for her own evolution. It has become a symbol of hope, but also of action. She didn't just keep her words, she lived out her mission. She became proof that, no matter how difficult life was, the choice of how to react to it would always be in her hands. And that's how, with unwavering determination, she earned the respect of everyone around her. It not only got back on its feet, but it also lifted up other people. She turned her pain into something powerful, something that moved mountains. His journey was now a testament that it is possible to not only survive adversity, but also flourish in it. The woman who was once helpless and invisible now became a leader, a voice capable of resonating and transforming lives. The past of pain now gave way to a future of light, a future that she herself was building, with her own hands, heart, and mind. She knew that the path was still far from easy, but now, every step she took was loaded with confidence and courage. She didn't just want a better future. She was creating it. Her story became a beacon of light for those who felt lost, and she knew that her journey was not only about herself, but about all those who could see themselves in her, who could find in her the strength they might not even know they had. She became the living example that no one needs to be defined by their past, their circumstances, or what the world says they are. She showed, in an incredibly powerful way, that there is always room for a new story, a new life, a new chance. And as she continued her journey, there was no longer any doubt in her mind. Not only had she overcome the past, but she was now shaping a future where more and more children would be rescued, where more stories of overcoming like hers would be written. She became, without realizing it, an inspiration to everyone around her. The girl who was once abandoned in the dirty basement now became the woman who, with her strength, her kindness, and her vision, helped transform the world. She was living proof that no matter how dark the beginning, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel, a transformation in progress. She was a walk of everyone who wanted to believe that the impossible could be conquered. And as she followed, the woman who had once been an abandoned girl knew that her mission was not yet over. The impact it would generate would be even greater. She was just beginning to write the most significant chapters of her life. Each child rescued, each story of overcoming that she touched, made her an even stronger woman, even more determined, and somehow more connected to all those who suffered in silence, as she once did. Each new journey of healing and transformation she helped create was a confirmation that the true reward was not in material wealth, but in the impact it could have on the lives of others. Time had passed, but she no longer saw herself as the same girl who entered that basement. She had become a woman of unwavering faith, a woman who believed, with all her might, that no one needs to be defined by what she went through, but rather by what she chooses to be. And she, without a shadow of a doubt, had chosen to be someone who would turn pain into strength and rejection into purpose. She had chosen to be the light at the end of the tunnel for so many other children. Life often teaches us that it is not the starting point that defines our journey, but the way we choose to go through challenges. When we look at this girl, who was once despised, rejected, and ignored, we can realize that greatness is not hidden in appearances. It reminds us that behind any suffering there is an untapped potential, a force that is not always visible, but that is there, waiting to be awakened. And it is exactly this strength that life teaches us to recognize, not only in others, but in ourselves. In each of us, there is a deep reserve of courage, resilience, and often a wisdom that we did not even know we had. What this story teaches us, more than anything else, is that no one should ever be judged where they start. The world tends to value those who have success in sight, those whose achievements are quick and visible. But a person's true worth is often hidden in the silent battles they fight within themselves. The wounds that, over time, heal and turn into strength. The suffering, which, for many, would be the end, may actually be just the beginning of a story of unbelievable overcoming. This girl's journey is a reflection of the power of transformation that we all carry within us. She was rescued from the bottom of the well, where pain and loneliness were her only companions. But she didn't let that define her. She knew that no matter how difficult the path was, the end of the line was not the end of life. She didn't just weather the storm. She learned to dance in the rain. And this transformation was not something that happened overnight, but rather the result of decisions made one step at a time, a mindset of overcoming that guided her through the rubble to the reconstruction of a new self. And it's not just about her story. Each of us has the power to change. The difference is in how we choose to react to adversity, how we decide to see the difficulties we face. The mindset we choose to adopt in the face of our own challenges can be what makes all the difference between staying at the bottom or emerging stronger, wiser, more compassionate. Difficulties are not the end of the road. They are the fuel of our evolution. And that's something she knew, maybe not fully understood at first, but throughout her journey, it became clearer and clearer to her. True love, the one that goes beyond simple charity or momentary compassion, was what gave her the strength to start over. The rescue is not only physical, but emotional and psychological. When she was first embraced by someone who saw her beyond the pain, she found what she needed to start believing again. It wasn't just one person offering a roof over their heads or food. It was someone who saw something deeper in her, who believed in her when she could barely believe in herself. And that love wasn't just what saved her, but what inspired her to save others along the way. It reminds us that true love is not possessive or conditioned. It is liberating and transformative. And when we surrender to Him, He gives us the strength to go beyond our own limits. This girl is no longer a shadow of the difficulties she experienced. She is no longer the victim of His story, but the heroine of it. Her journey of overcoming has led her to a place where she has not only rebuilt her life, but also begun to rebuild the lives of others, with the strength of a living example that the impossible is just a matter of perspective. And as she continued on her mission, her life became a bridge for other children who were lost to find the same light. The true moral of the story is that someone's worth can never be measured by their most difficult moment. We all have potential that goes beyond temporary circumstances. Sometimes it takes a little push, a rescue, or a simple word of support for this potential to begin to reveal itself. But true greatness, true strength, lies in never losing faith in what we can become. No matter how hard life has tried to bring us down, there's always a path ahead, a chance to rewrite our history. And, as she showed with her life, love and truth always find a way to win. It may take time, it may seem impossible, but they are the most powerful forces that exist. Love rescued her. The truth freed her. And together, these forces made her a woman capable of impacting and transforming lives. What she did on her journey from pain to overcoming is a true revelation that, no matter how dark the night, the light of dawn always comes. So when we look at anyone who is going through difficult times, let us not let it define their value, no matter what is visible on the outside. What matters is a silent force that resides in every human being, waiting for the right moment to shine. A person's true worth is not in what they own or what they have, but in what they are capable of becoming, even when life tries to stop them. And that, my friend, is something we can all achieve. The choice to transform pain into strength, to transform rejection into purpose, is in our hands. We can, at any time, decide that our history will not be determined by our difficulties, but by the way we decide to overcome them. This journey is not easy, but it is possible for everyone who believes that, at the end of the day, what defines us is not the mistakes of the past, but the power of our choices in the present. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and in the comments write, "I will never give up on my dreams." Share it with someone who needs to believe that life can still surprise. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories like this.